The Wyoming sun scorched the endless prairie like a branding iron pressed against leather, turning the July morning into a furnace that shimmered with heat waves. Jesse McCade urged his bay mare across the parched landscape, his throat raw as sandpaper and his water gone since dawn. The weight of 3 sleepless days pressed down on his shoulders like a millstone, each mile carrying him further from the chaos he'd left behind in Dusty Fork. The bar fight haunted his thoughts with persistent clarity. Tom Brady had come at him with a broken whiskey bottle, his eyes wild with liquor, and something else, a cold calculation that didn't match his drunken stumbling. When Jesse put 2 bullets in Brady's chest, the dying man had whispered something that chilled his blood. "You walked right into it, McCade, just like they said you would." At the time, Jesse had dismissed it as the ramblings of a man with his life leaking out onto sawdust. But during the long hours in the saddle, other details surfaced like bubbles in stagnant water. The bartender who'd watched the fight with too much interest, his pale eyes tracking every movement as if memorizing them. The way Brady had known personal things about Jesse's sister Mary, about the scar on his left shoulder from a Comanche arrow, details no stranger should possess. Someone's been asking questions about me. Jesse realized, scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. But who and why? A structure materialized through the heat distortion ahead. A 2-story farmhouse standing alone in the vastness, like a gravestone, marking some forgotten tragedy. Its windows were sealed with rough-hewn planks, and the front porch sagged under years of neglect. But Jesse's experienced eye caught the metallic glint beside the building that meant salvation, a well pump. He dismounted 50 yards out, his boots crunching on ground baked harder than brick. The silence pressed against his eardrums with unnatural weight, not the peaceful quiet of empty land, but the held-breath stillness of secrets waiting to be discovered. The pump handle fought him at first, its joints protesting with rusty squeaks that seemed to echo across the prairie. On the 4th stroke, clear water gushed forth, and Jesse thrust his head under the stream, feeling life flow back into his parched body. He was refilling his canteen when a sound froze him mid-motion. A sob faint as wind through grass drifted down from somewhere above. Then came a voice cracked and desperate with 20 years of disuse. "Please, is someone there? Don't leave me alone again." Jesse's hand moved instinctively to his Colt .45 as he stepped back from the well water still dripping from his dark hair. His pale blue eyes searched the upper story of the house, looking for movement behind those boarded windows. "Help me." The voice came again, stronger now, carrying a desperation that cut through his natural caution like a blade through silk. "I've been waiting so long for someone to hear me." In the single, unboarded window of the attic, a face appeared, gaunt and pale, as morning frost framed by long, dark hair that looked like it hadn't seen care in decades. Thin fingers wrapped around iron bars that had been welded across the opening, and eyes that held too much knowledge of suffering stared down at him with desperate hope. "Who's up there?" Jesse called, his voice carrying easily in the still air. "You injured?" The woman's laugh held no joy, only the bitter recognition of an impossible situation. "Injured, I suppose you could call it that. I've been injured for 20 years since I was 7 years old." Her voice grew urgent, almost frantic. "Are you real? Sometimes I dream of rescue and it feels so vivid until I wake up and realize I'm still here." Jesse studied her face, trying to separate truth from madness born of isolation. She appeared to be in her late 20s, which would mean 20 years. "You were just a child when they murdered my parents and locked me in this cage like some animal." The words came out in a rush, as if she'd been rehearsing them for decades. "My name is Anna Marie Laird, and this was my family's ranch before the Brannigan brothers decided they wanted it more than we did." The name struck Jesse like a physical blow to the chest. Every drifter, cowpoke, and settler in Wyoming territory knew the story of the Laird massacre. A wealthy ranching family found slaughtered in their beds one crisp October night 15 years back, their valuable holdings mysteriously transferred to Eli and Cole Brannigan within the month. The official report blamed Apache raiders for the deaths and claimed the young daughter had been taken, her body never recovered from the wilderness. Because she was never dead. Jesse realized his mind racing through implications that made his head spin. They kept her alive all this time. Listen carefully. Anna continued, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper that barely carried to him. If you're thinking of helping me, you need to understand what you're walking into. The Brannigans don't just own land, they own people. Sheriff Morris and Judge Harlan have the territorial government. They have spies everywhere, and they kill anyone who threatens their empire. Jesse was already moving toward the house, but her next words stopped him cold as winter wind. They've killed 7 men over the years. 7 different riders who found me and tried to help. I watched them die one by one, and I can't. Her voice broke slightly. I can't watch another good man die because of me. Something in her tone, a mixture of hope and despair, that spoke directly to the guilt he carried about his sister's death, made Jesse's decision for him. He'd been running from responsibility his whole adult life, running from the memory of Mary's murder by outlaws while he was away gambling, from the crushing weight of failure that ate at him like acid. Maybe it was time to stop running. Ma'am, I've been carrying around guilt for 5 years now, Jesse said, checking his weapon out of habit. Might as well put it to good use. The back door of the house splintered under his boot with a crash that echoed through the interior like thunder. Dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight that penetrated cracks in the boarded windows, and the air tasted of abandonment, something else. Terror aged and concentrated like vintage wine. Jesse moved through the house with the practiced stealth of a man who'd learned to live in shadows. Furniture stood draped in white sheets, like ghosts waiting for resurrection, and family portraits hung askew on the walls, their subjects staring out with eyes that had once held happiness and now held only accusation. At the end of a narrow hallway, he found what Anna had described, a heavy wooden beam wedged across a door secured with a padlock the size of his fist. The metal showed rust, but remained solid, designed to keep someone imprisoned rather than keep intruders out. I'm here, Jesse called softly through the door. I'm going to get you free. You don't understand the danger. Anna's voice came through the wood, muffled but desperate. They come here every 3 days to check on me, to bring food and water. If they find you here, they'll kill us both without hesitation. Every 3 days, Jesse noted, which means they could arrive at any time. The distant rumble of multiple horses approaching at speed cut through his thoughts like a knife. Jesse pressed his ear to the exterior wall, counting the rhythm. At least 4 riders, possibly more, coming fast with the urgency of men on deadly business. They're here, Anna whispered through the door, her voice tight with panic. Hide, please. Just hide and let them pass. I won't have another death on my conscience. Jesse slipped into what had once been a pantry, pressing himself against the wall as the sound of horses grew louder. Through a gap in the warped door, he watched as the front entrance exploded inward under the impact of heavy boots. 2 men entered, and Jesse recognized them immediately from wanted posters and saloon gossip throughout the territory. Eli Brannigan was the older brother, built like a bull, with graying hair and scars that mapped a lifetime of violence. Cole was younger, but carried himself with the casual cruelty of a man who found pleasure in inflicting pain on others. Something's different. Eli growled his dark eyes, scanning the room with predator's intensity. Air's been disturbed. Dust patterns have changed. Fresh horse tracks by the well. Cole added, drawing his gun with practiced ease. Still damp from the pump. Whoever it is, they're here recent. They're more observant than most outlaws, Jesse thought grimly. Smarter and more dangerous than their reputation suggests. Check our investment, Eli ordered, with the casual tone of a man discussing livestock. Make sure she's still breathing and cooperative. Cole stomped toward the attic door, his heavy boots echoing through the house like death drums. Jesse heard the beam being lifted, the padlock rattling open with metallic finality. "Still alive up there, princess." Cole's voice carried up the stairs, cruel and mocking. "Still keeping Daddy's secrets locked away in that pretty little head of yours. Go straight to hell." Anna's reply carried defiance despite her obvious terror. "You been there, sweetheart. Wasn't impressed." The sharp crack of a hand striking flesh echoed through the house, followed by Anna's sharp intake of breath. "Now you ready to tell us where your daddy hid that strong box, the one with all his important papers and documents?" Jesse's jaw clenched at the sound of Anna's pain. 20 years of captivity, and they were still tormenting her for information. "I've told you 1,000 times over 20 years. Anna said, her voice steady despite what must have been tremendous suffering. "I don't know what you're talking about. I was 7 years old." "Us, wrong answer as always." Cole's voice carried the promise of escalating violence. "But don't worry, we've got all the time in the world. And if our mysterious visitor wants to come out and play hero well, that'll just make things more entertaining for everyone involved." The realization hit Jesse like cold water. They knew he was there. The question was whether they knew his identity or simply suspected an intruder. "They're toying with me," he understood. "This is all part of some larger game." After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the brothers departed, their parting words a mixture of threats and promises of swift return. Jesse waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely before emerging from his hiding place, his heart hammering against his ribs. Working at the padlock with his knife tip took precious time, sweat pouring down his face as he manipulated the crude tool. When the metal finally gave way with a satisfying snap, he hauled the wooden beam aside and climbed the narrow stairs, his heart hammering with anticipation and dread. The attic was a monument to human endurance. A small cot with a threadbare mattress, a chamber pot, a tin cup for collecting rainwater, a small mirror cracked down the middle. These items comprised the entire world Anna Laird had known for 2 decades. She sat huddled in the corner, her dress little more than rags, her arms thin as fence posts. But her eyes burned with intelligence and determination that 20 years of imprisonment hadn't been able to extinguish. "You came back," she whispered, as if she still couldn't quite believe another human being stood before her. Jesse knelt beside her, shocked by her frailness, but struck by the strength that radiated from her despite everything. "I gave my word. Now, about this strong box your father hid, do you really not know where it is?" Anna's expression shifted, and for the first time, Jesse saw calculation in her eyes. "I know exactly where it is," she admitted quietly. "I've been protecting that secret for 20 years, watching good men die rather than reveal it. But you need to understand what's really at stake." She moved to a section of the floor that looked identical to the rest, pressing on specific boards in a complex sequence that spoke of years of practice. When the hidden mechanism responded, revealing a concealed compartment, Jesse understood the depth of her father's planning. "It's not just evidence of their crimes against my family," Anna explained as they worked together to pry up the specially designed floorboards. "My father was documenting a conspiracy that reaches from our territorial government all the way to Washington. Land grants, federal appointments, territorial contracts, the Brannigans are just the visible face of something much larger." The strongbox emerged from its hiding place like a treasure from a pirate's den, its metal surface etched with intricate patterns that served to disguise it as decorative metalwork. Anna's hands shook as she worked the combination lock. A series of numbers that she explained represented significant dates in her family's history. Inside were documents that made Jesse's hands tremble as he read them. Property deeds spanning 3 territories, correspondence with federal officials whose names he recognized from newspaper headlines. And most damning of all, detailed records of bribes, murders, and land thefts that painted a picture of systematic corruption reaching from Wyoming to the halls of Congress itself. This isn't just about one family's tragedy, Jesse realized, as the scope became clear. This could bring down territorial governors, federal judges, maybe even senators. Now you understand why they kept me alive, Anna said, watching his face as comprehension dawned. Under territorial law, they needed my signature to make the land transfers completely legal and uncontestable. They've been waiting for me to reach majority age planning to force me into marriage with one of them. With my consent, however coerced, the property deeds would be beyond legal challenge. And in the meantime, they needed to ensure you couldn't reveal what you'd witnessed the night your parents died, or what I knew about the strongbox's location. Anna's voice carried the weight of 20 years of carefully guarded secrets. They tortured my parents before they killed them, trying to make them reveal where this evidence was hidden. But my parents died protecting these documents, and I've honored their sacrifice every day since. Every day for 20 years, Jessie thought humbled by her dedication, watching men die rather than break. The sound of approaching horses more this time, at least 8 riders by the sound, cut their conversation short like a blade. They're back, Anna whispered, the color draining from her already pale face. And they brought their entire crew this time. Jessie peered through the barred window, his blood turning to ice, as he recognized not just the Brannigan brothers, but 6 hired guns he knew by reputation. Dangerous men who killed for money and asked no questions about their targets. But it was the conversation drifting up from below as they dismounted that made Jessie's world tilt sideways like a house in an earthquake. "Found out who our visitor is," Eli was saying as he secured his horse to the hitching post. "Jesse McCade wanted for killing Tom Brady and Dusty Fork 3 days ago. Brady was working for us," Cole replied with savage satisfaction. "Been tracking McCade for weeks, feeding him information, herding him toward this exact location, like a steer toward slaughter." Jesse felt his chest constrict as understanding crashed over him like an avalanche. The fight in Dusty Fork hadn't been random at all. Brady had been planted there specifically, probably under orders to provoke Jesse into a gunfight and then deliberately lose it. But why, Jesse wondered. What made me worth manipulating? They knew I was coming here. He whispered to Anna, pieces of a larger puzzle falling into place like dominoes. They've been watching me, manipulating me, guiding me to this exact moment. It's their method. Anna confirmed, her voice hollow with despair, born of experience. They identify potential threats and either buy them off, kill them outright, or arrange for their deaths in ways that serve their purposes. Tom Brady must have been reporting on your movements for months. The bartender at McGillicuddy's saloon suddenly made sense, those pale eyes that had watched the fight with too much interest, the way he'd seemed to be memorizing every detail rather than simply witnessing a bar brawl. They let people think they can be heroes. Anna continued, her voice breaking slightly. They allow them to get close to me, to discover the evidence, to believe they can make a difference. Then they kill them in front of me as punishment for daring to hope for rescue. How extensive is their network? Jesse asked, his mind racing through implications that grew more terrifying with each revelation. More extensive than you can imagine. Shopkeepers, bartenders, even some of the circuit preachers report to them. They have informants throughout the territory. Anna gripped the strongbox tighter, her knuckles white with tension. That's what makes this evidence so dangerous. It names names, shows the money trail, documents the entire web of corruption. Half the territorial government would fall if this information became public. And I walked right into their trap, Jesse realized with growing horror, just like Brady said I would. The sound of boots on the front porch below signaled the end of their brief planning session. "Oh, we know you're up there, McCade." Eli's voice boomed through the house like thunder. "And we know you found what you shouldn't have found. Come down peacefully, and we'll make your death quick and clean." Jesse checked his ammunition quickly, 6 bullets in his gun, maybe a dozen more in his belt. Against 8 experienced killers, it might as well be a handful of pebbles against a mountain. Oh, there's no way out, Anna said quietly, reading his thoughts with the accuracy of someone who had contemplated this scenario countless times. The window bars are welded solid to iron posts sunk deep in the wall. The stairs are the only exit, and they'll be guarding them with their lives. Then we make our own way out. Jesse drew his gun and fired 2 shots through the floor at angles calculated to scatter the men below. The return gunfire was immediate, and devastating bullets splintering through the aged wood like angry hornets seeking blood. "Now get behind the chimney," Jesse shouted, pushing Anna toward the only solid cover in the room as chunks of wood exploded around them like shrapnel. "Anna." Cole's voice cut through the gunfire like a sword. "You listening up there? Every second you don't surrender, we're going to put another bullet in your boyfriend's direction." What do you say to that proposition? Jesse saw the familiar look of resignation beginning to form in Anna's eyes, the same expression she must have worn while watching 7 previous rescue attempts end in tragedy. She was preparing to surrender herself to save his life. Not this time, Jesse thought with grim determination. He'd spent 5 years running from his failure to protect his sister Mary. He wouldn't fail again, wouldn't let another innocent person die because of his inadequacy. "You want that strongbox?" Jesse shouted down through the bullet-riddled floor. "Come up here and take it yourselves." He grabbed the oil lamp from a rickety shelf and hurled it against the dry wooden wall, watching kerosene spread across decades of accumulated dust and neglect. The flame caught instantly, racing across the floor like liquid lightning seeking fuel. "Are you completely insane?" Anna gasped, staring at the rapidly spreading blaze. "Probably. But I'm not dying in a cage like some trapped animal. And neither are you." Jesse kicked at the window bars, testing their strength against the growing urgency of the situation. "Either we get out of this prison, or we all go down together in the cleansing." The bars held firm against his boots, but the wooden window frame was older, weakened by decades of weather and neglect. Jesse used the butt of his gun to hammer at the frame while smoke began to fill the air around them with choking intensity. "They'll just wait outside for us to burn." Anna coughed, covering her mouth with a torn piece of her dress. "Maybe. But if we're lucky, all this smoke will draw attention from town. Either way, we're not giving them the satisfaction of taking us alive and helpless." Anna's eyes widened with sudden understanding and hope. A signal. Of course, the smoke will be visible for miles across this flat terrain. She grabbed a shard of broken glass from the shattered lamp and began sawing at the rope that had once been used to lower her meager meals through a trap door. "We can use this to rappel down the outside wall if you can break through that window frame." The work became frantic as the blaze spread across the attic floor with terrifying speed, filling the air with smoke so thick it was like trying to breathe underwater. Jesse's eyes streamed tears as he finally succeeded in breaking through the rotted window frame, creating an opening barely wide enough for them to squeeze through one at a time. Below them in the yard, they could hear the Brannigans shouting orders to their men, their voices mixing panic with rage as smoke began pouring from every crack and crevice in the rapidly burning building. "The house is lost," Eli roared above the crackling of flames. "But they don't escape, Cole. Take Morrison and Daniels, circle around to the back. Jake, you and Rodriguez watch the front. They have to come out somewhere, and when they do, we finish this." Jesse tied their improvised rope to the strongest beam he could locate, testing its strength with his full weight, while smoke made it impossible to see more than a few feet in any direction. The heat was becoming unbearable, and he could hear the ominous creaking of structural beams beginning to weaken under the assault. "You first," he told Anna, helping her toward the window opening. "The strongbox, we can't leave it. Without this evidence, they win. They always win, no matter how many people die trying to stop them." She was right, Jesse realized. Their testimony alone wouldn't be enough against the extensive corruption documented in those papers. Anna slung the metal box over her shoulder with the rope, and Jesse marveled at her determination despite her physical frailty. The descent down the side of the burning building was harrowing beyond description. The rope burned their hands as they slid down the rough exterior wall, chunks of flaming debris falling around them like hellish snow. They hit the ground hard, Jesse's shoulders screaming in protest as they rolled away from the increasingly dangerous structure. But their escape had been observed and anticipated. There they are. Cole Brannigan emerged from the smoke like a demon materializing from the flames, his gun already drawn and aimed. "Going somewhere, princess. After 20 years, you're finally ready to leave home." Jesse stepped between them, his own weapon ready, though he knew the odds were impossibly stacked against their survival. Through the smoke and heat distortion, he could see other figures moving with purpose, at least 6 more gunmen, all armed, all desperate to silence the only witnesses to their crimes. "This ends right here, Cole," Jesse said, surprised by how calm his own voice sounded despite the chaos surrounding them. "Oh, it ends all right, but not the way you think it will." Cole's smile was death itself wearing human features. "See, even if you somehow manage to kill me, even if you kill all of us standing here, there are still others. Judge Harlan, Sheriff Morrison, a dozen more officials who'll make sure this evidence never sees the inside of an honest courtroom." It was then that Anna did something that changed the entire dynamic of their desperate situation. Instead of cowering or pleading, she threw back her head and screamed not a cry of fear or pain, but a war cry that had been building in her throat for 20 years of imprisonment and abuse. "These men murdered my family," she shouted, holding the strongbox high above her head so that it caught the light from the burning building behind them. "They killed my parents and kept me prisoner for 20 years, and this strongbox contains proof of everything, every murder, every bribe, every corrupt deal that's rotted this territory from the inside out." Jesse realized with sudden hope that they weren't alone anymore. Riders were approaching from multiple directions, drawn by the massive column of smoke rising from what everyone in the territory knew as the old Laird place. Some came out of curiosity, others from concern for neighbors, but all were witnessing Anna's dramatic revelation. But as the first townspeople crested the hill, Jesse noticed something that made his blood run cold. Among the approaching riders, he recognized a face from his memory, the pale-eyed bartender from McGillicuddy's saloon, and the one who had watched the Brady fight with such intense interest. They have people planted even among the rescuers, Jesse realized with growing dread. This trap goes deeper than I thought. The gunfight that erupted was unlike anything Jesse had experienced in his years of frontier violence. With the burning house at their backs, casting dancing shadows, and enemies emerging from multiple directions, he and Anna found themselves fighting for their lives against overwhelming odds. Jesse's first shot took Cole Brannigan in the gun hand, sending his weapon spinning into the dirt with a spray of blood. His second bullet found one of the hired guns in the shoulder, spinning him around like a child's toy. But return gunfire was coming from multiple directions, bullets whining past his head like angry insects seeking flesh. Anna, despite her physical weakness, proved surprisingly resourceful in the chaos. When one of the gunmen tried to circle around behind Jesse during the firefight, she swung the heavy strongbox like a club, catching him across the temple and dropping him to the ground, unconscious. "Behind you!" she shouted over the gunfire, and Jesse spun to put a bullet in the chest of another attacker who had been drawing a bead on his back. But it was the arrival of the townspeople that truly began to shift the balance of power. As more riders crested the hill drawn by smoke and the sound of gunfire, the dynamic of the confrontation changed dramatically. These weren't just curious bystanders. They were ranchers, shopkeepers, and settlers who had suffered under Brannigan intimidation for years. "Anna Laird," one of them shouted, recognizing her despite the years and hardship that had transformed her appearance. "Sweet, merciful Jesus, that's little Anna Laird." The revelation rippled through the growing crowd like electricity through water. Everyone knew the story of the Laird massacre, and seeing her alive, clearly having been held prisoner for all these years, ignited a fury that had been smoldering in the community for decades. Eli Brannigan tried to maintain control of the situation, his voice booming over the chaos. This is official territorial business. These people are criminals, fugitives from justice. I order you all to disperse immediately." But Anna stepped forward, the strongbox clutched in her arms, her voice carrying clearly across the assembled crowd, despite her physical frailty. "I am Anna Marie Laird, daughter of Thomas and Catherine Laird, rightful owner of this land, and witness to murder, corruption, and 20 years of imprisonment at the hands of these men." She opened the strongbox with hands that shook, but held steady enough to spread documents across the ground for all to see. "These papers prove that the Brannigan brothers murdered my family in cold blood, stole our land through forged documents, and have been running a criminal empire with the help of corrupt territorial officials for over 20 years. The crowd's reaction was immediate and visceral. These were people who had lost friends, neighbors, and family members to Brannigan violence over the years, who had watched their community live in fear, while justice remained perpetually out of reach. But then the pale-eyed bartender from Dusty Fork pushed through the crowd, his voice carrying false authority. "Don't listen to her. She's been locked away for 20 years. She's clearly mad from isolation, and those documents could be forgeries." Several other voices in the crowd echoed his skepticism, and Jesse realized with growing alarm that the Brannigans had anticipated this scenario. They had planted supporters among the townspeople ready to sow doubt and confusion when the truth finally emerged. "They've thought of everything," Jesse understood with sinking heart. Even this rescue was planned for. But Anna had endured 20 years of captivity by being smarter and more determined than her captors had ever imagined. As the crowd began to murmur with uncertainty, she pulled out a sealed envelope from the very bottom of the strongbox, one that Jesse hadn't noticed before. "You want proof these documents are genuine." Anna called out, her voice growing stronger with righteous anger. "This letter is from Deputy United States Marshal Samuel Harrison, dated 3 months before my parents' murder. My father wasn't just documenting local crimes, he was working directly with federal investigators to expose territorial corruption." She broke the official federal seal and read aloud, "Thomas Laird is hereby authorized to gather evidence of corruption, bribery, and murder in Wyoming Territory for presentation to a federal grand jury. This investigation has the full backing of the United States Marshal Service and the Department of Justice." The effect on the crowd was electric. Federal involvement meant this wasn't just local politics, it was a matter of national law enforcement. Even the planted Brannigan supporters fell silent in the face of such unimpeachable authority. But Eli Brannigan wasn't finished yet. With the desperation of a cornered animal, he pulled a small derringer from his boot and aimed it directly at Anna's head. "Federal authorization or not, she dies before she can testify," he snarled. "And that evidence burns with her." It was Jesse who moved first, launching himself between Anna and the gun. But it was Anna who provided the final twist that sealed the Brannigans' fate. "That letter you just heard isn't the original," she said calmly, even with a gun pointed at her head. "It's a copy. Deputy Marshal Harrison gave my father 3 copies, one for the strongbox, one hidden elsewhere on the property, and one sent directly to Washington before my parents were murdered." She looked directly at the pale-eyed bartender who had tried to discredit her. "The federal government has been watching this territory for 20 years, waiting for the right moment to move. Every crime you've committed, every person you've bribed, every murder you've covered up, it's all been documented and reported." The bartender's face went white as understanding dawned on him and everyone else present. This hadn't been about rescuing one woman. It had been about exposing an entire network of corruption that federal authorities had been building a case against for decades. Judge Harlan arrived at that moment with a contingent of territorial guards, expecting to clean up another Brannigan mess and cover up any inconvenient evidence. Instead, he found himself staring down the barrel of federal justice as Anna confronted him directly. "You took their money, Judge Harlan," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet that had fallen over the scene. "You looked the other way while they murdered innocent families. You perverted justice for personal gain, And it's all documented in these papers, dates, amounts, even copies of your private correspondence, discussing which properties to target next. Harlan's face went ashen as the implications crashed over him. His political career, his reputation, his freedom, everything was crumbling around him like the burned ruins of the house behind them. This is preposterous. He blustered with the desperation of a drowning man. The ravings of a woman clearly driven insane by years of isolation and abuse. None of this would stand up in any legitimate court of law. And maybe not in your corrupted territorial court. Anna replied with steel in her voice. But federal judges tend to take a dim view of territorial corruption, especially when it involves murder and conspiracy against federal law enforcement efforts. The crowd pressed closer, their mood shifting from uncertainty to righteous anger as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. These weren't just local crimes, they were part of a systematic assault on justice itself. In the chaos that followed, federal marshals who had been positioned around the territory for months finally moved in to make arrests. The Brannigan empire, built on violence and corruption, crumbled in a matter of hours as evidence that had been carefully preserved for 20 years finally saw the light of day. The trials that followed became a sensation throughout the American West, drawing reporters from major newspapers and magazines across the country. Anna's testimony, backed by irrefutable documentary evidence, painted a picture of systematic corruption that shocked even hardened frontier communities accustomed to violence and lawlessness. The Brannigan brothers were convicted of multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, land fraud, and conspiracy against federal law enforcement. Both were sentenced to hang their executions, drawing crowds from across the territory who came to witness the end of 2 decades of terror. Judge Harlan was stripped of his position and sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Sheriff Morrison fled the territory, but was captured in Colorado and brought back to face charges. The territorial governor resigned in disgrace when his connections to the conspiracy became public knowledge. Jesse found himself not only cleared of all charges related to the Tom Brady shooting, but hailed as a hero for his role in rescuing Anna and exposing the conspiracy. The revelation that Brady had been acting on Brannigan orders to manipulate Jesse into the trap transformed him from fugitive to symbol of frontier justice. But it was Anna's recovery that truly amazed everyone who witnessed it over the following months. Physically, she remained frail for a long time, slowly rebuilding strength that 20 years of captivity had stolen from her body. Emotionally, however, she proved to be remarkably resilient, channeling her anger and pain into a determination to see justice done not just for herself, but for all the victims of territorial corruption. Jesse stayed to help her rebuild the Laird Ranch, finding in the honest work and righteous purpose something his soul had been lacking for years. Their relationship developed slowly over the months of reconstruction, built on mutual respect and shared trauma, growing into something deeper as they worked side by side to restore not just the ranch, but the entire community's faith in justice. Anna used the recovered lands and the substantial compensation awarded by the federal government to establish programs for other victims of territorial corruption and violence. She funded schools, supported widows and orphans, and became a powerful voice advocating for frontier justice and federal oversight of territorial governments. It was during the winter months, while organizing her father's papers and legal documents, that Anna made the final discovery that would secure not just her future, but the future of honest governance throughout the territory. Hidden in a secret compartment of the strongbox, one that had required a special key her father had concealed separately, was a hand-drawn map showing the location of a substantial gold deposit in the hills above the ranch. The accompanying letter, written in her father's careful handwriting, brought tears to her eyes, even months after her rescue. My dearest daughter Anna, if you are reading this, then truth has finally triumphed over lies and justice has prevailed over corruption. The gold deposits marked on this map will provide you with the means to rebuild not just our ranch, but our entire community along principles of honesty and fairness. Use this wealth wisely and justly, remembering always that your greatest treasure was never buried in the ground. It was your courage, your strength, and your refusal to surrender hope, even in the darkest of times. The conspiracy we exposed together reaches into the highest levels of territorial and federal government. But with the evidence you've preserved and the support it will bring you, have the power to ensure such systematic corruption never again takes root in our territory. Build something better, something worthy of the sacrifices your mother and I made. Make our deaths meaningful by ensuring others never suffer as you have suffered. And remember that justice delayed is not justice denied if brave people are willing to fight for what is right. Anna looked up at Jesse, who had been reading over her shoulder, and saw her own wonder and determination reflected in his eyes. There's enough gold to fund honest governance throughout the territory, Jesse said quietly, understanding the implications immediately. Enough to make certain this never happens to anyone else. Anna corrected her voice, filled with purpose and resolve. Enough to establish schools, courts, and law enforcement agencies that serve justice instead of corruption. Enough to build the kind of community my parents dreamed of when they first came to this territory. The gold discovery was handled with careful secrecy, initially revealed only to trusted federal authorities, who helped Anna establish proper mining claims and security procedures. The wealth it provided enabled her to become one of the most influential voices in territorial reform, funding honest political candidates and supporting the establishment of permanent federal oversight that would prevent future corruption. As spring returned to the Wyoming hills, painting the landscape in shades of green and gold, Anna stood in the place where her prison had once stood and looked toward a future she had never dared imagine during those long years of captivity. The burned ruins had been cleared away and replaced with a simple stone memorial listing the names of all the victims of Brannigan violence, including the 7 men who had died trying to rescue her over the years. Beside her, Jesse McCade, no longer a fugitive, no longer burdened by guilt over his sister's death, watched the sunrise paint the mountains in brilliant colors. Their relationship had deepened into something neither had expected, but both treasured, built on shared understanding of loss, redemption, and the hard-won knowledge that justice sometimes requires great sacrifice. Sometimes, I still can't believe it's truly over, Anna said softly, her hand finding his as they stood together in the morning light. It's not over, Jesse replied, squeezing her fingers gently and looking out over the land they had helped free from corruption. It's just beginning. What we've accomplished here, what you've accomplished, it's going to change everything, not just in Wyoming, but across the entire frontier. Anna smiled, and in that expression was all the strength that had sustained her through 20 years of darkness, combined with the hope that would guide her through whatever challenges the future might bring. The girl who had been hidden in the attic for 2 decades was gone forever, replaced by a woman whose voice would ensure that justice and truth rang out across the frontier for generations to come. In the distance, smoke rose from the chimneys of farmhouses, and the growing town, honest people living free lives in a land where corruption had been exposed and defeated, where federal law now protected the innocent from those who would exploit them. The network that had seemed so powerful and untouchable had crumbled when confronted with truth, courage, and the unwavering determination of one woman who refused to let evil triumph. The morning sun climbed higher into the cloudless sky, but the beacon Anna had lit in the hearts of honest people would burn forever, a warning to any who would prey upon the innocent that their crimes would not go unpunished, and a promise that justice, however long delayed, would ultimately prevail.